Welcome back to Partners Dog School. This week we have the privilege of working with Wyatt, an Aussie cattle mix that needs his reactivity and socialization improved in a number of different scenarios and situations. His owners are just about to pull up, so we are excited to meet them and Wyatt.
Hi, my name's Chase. I'm one of our senior instructors here for Partners Dog Training at our Shea location. I'm going to be one of the responsible instructors for Mr. Wyatt. When his owners, Art and Ethan, first brought him in, they mentioned several key things they wanted us to address with Wyatt during his 3-week behavior camp. One, they were concerned with Wyatt's reactivity and naughty behaviors towards their other dogs in the house, including his sibling Sapphire, a small Chihuahua. 2, Wyatt had triggers towards certain items of clothing and would become extremely uncomfortable and start barking at certain people wearing them. And 3, he had already gone through training before but was unwilling to work well with either owner and needed to build a stronger foundational obedience. Rest assured, I made sure that all these issues would be handled over the next few weeks and went right into training the next day. Starting off with the very basics, I want to teach him to be comfortable when I'm approaching him to either, start a session, pull him out to rotate him. Because, what I noticed on Saturday when he checked in, wasn't getting very reactive, but definitely very uncomfortable. When I'm trying to put a slip leash on, pulling him out of the kennel, a couple times he would back out, go sit behind on his place bed, a lot of ducking his head, so I can tell, quick movements is a trigger for him. So I just want to kind of build up his confidence, teach him to be comfortable coming in and out of this kennel. I'm curious to see, I don't think I'm going to be able to kind of coax him out there. So I definitely do need to at least step into his crate a little bit to get the slip leash on him. But again, I don't want to instantly, step right in, put all that pressure on him. I kind of want to desensitize him to me, my voice, just simply my energy, kind of calming him down. So, like I said earlier, I like that, on his own. Even though he's kind of backed away to the kennel, he's not in defense mode. He kind of went into that more submissive shut down mode, the way he's positioned in that down on his bed. So he's not challenging me, but definitely still very uncomfortable. Hi, buddy. So I'm just going to step in a little bit. Good boy. Yes. So that actually went a lot better than I thought it would. And now, starting to instantly focus on my training. I'm in kind of a sticky situation. I don't want to necessarily be stuck in this kennel with him. But, I don't want him necessarily rushing out right now. So what I'm going to do is slowly start to kind of just see what his triggers are. So, the way that I'm touching him right now, I kind of call this a brush test. I can definitely tell he's very tense. His body is very tight. So you might not be able to see it on the camera right now, but he's definitely very flinching. But, as I am now doing this little brush test, his body's definitely loosened up. He's not as flinchy every time I'm touching him. So that's showing me very quickly, he's getting desensitized to my touch, my energy. He's getting a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more opened up with me. So that's a good sign. But now again, once I kind of step away from him and go to walk out of here, I don't want that sudden movement to be a trigger for him. So now that he's a little bit curious, I'm going to let him walk out first. Good job, buddy. Good. I don't think I'm necessarily going to be able to accomplish too much, but again, that's not what my focus is today. His obedience will definitely come, but not if he's in this mindset. So, like I said, right now, I'm kind of just going to let him do his own thing, kind of just feel it out, smell everything, check all the people out, the dogs. But like I said, I kind of just want to see his demeanor, see how he's going to react in this environment. But again, I don't want to put too much pressure on him, overwhelm him, and then give him that negative association with me. Now, I don't want to push him too far with the training, but, simple stuff like that right there, that's a good sign for me. He definitely understands leash pressure, He's definitely fighting to get to the end of that leash, but he's not pulling right through that pressure. All right. And, when I did that first time, he naturally kind of came back to me and, was curious in my treat. But again, I don't think I have his trust yet, so he's definitely not going to be comfortable enough to take a food lure from me. And, I can already tell just by the way he kind of picks up on things, even without really having done any training yet. I can tell all his potential. He's going to be a very smart dog, so, that doesn't bother me too much if I have to kind of get into my shaping stage teaching him all the obedience a little bit later. But, definitely with a dog like this, I don't want to rush into things at all. So I think, the first several days is a lot of it just going to be similar training sessions like this. Just us out together, walking around, kind of doing some of that tether training. If he starts to offer me stuff again, I'll push him a little bit. But like I said, I don't want to push him past his limits too much, For the first week or so, I'm just going to kind of take what he gives me. And then, once I have that relationship, then I think, I'll definitely be a little bit more comfortable holding him accountable. For a first session, just kind of wanted to fill him out. I could definitely tell he's very uncomfortable, not receptive to just, my praise, doesn't really care too much about treats. I thought he definitely showed some interest in my squeak from my treat pouch. So I thought maybe he would show a little bit, interest or curiosity in a little squeaky toy, but kind of blew that off as well. So I think, just seeing all of that, my game plan was kind of correct. I think definitely a lot of his first several days, the focus of his training is just going to be simple, relationship building. He did show me some good signs. I could definitely tell he definitely has a decent pattern on him with, the previous training that he has had, definitely understands a lot of that leash pressure. I think, once I add value to myself and, have some trust, I'm going to be more successful with the lure, with the treats. He definitely, showed me signs of interest in it. But again, I don't think I have the value or the trust yet. So, he kind of chose to blow it off instead, again, taking that as a reward. But, definitely learned a lot about him. I think he's just very, very uncomfortable right now. Very good first session, learned a lot about him. But like I said, just have to accomplish that relationship. And then from there is when I think, he's going to be more willing to let me put some pressure on him, start teaching him. He's going to be more receptive to my training. But, just got to build up that relationship with him first. Good job, buddy. Good boy. Just make sure this is on properly. Right, and now I'm going to see how successful I can be at pairing the e-collar to his training and some of his commands. I've had a few very short, successful training sessions with him where he'll be in the positive mindset and is interested in, kind of following a lure or being a little bit motivated to offer me some of these commands. But, at least maybe 80% of the time, he's not really offering me too much. So I want to see if I can bridge in with the e-collar using a technique that we use called the pressure on, pressure off. So at a very, very low stem level, almost enough to just kind of annoy him. Again, I don't want to put too much pressure on him and make him uncomfortable to the point to where he's going to get shut down or even possibly have a negative association to the command that we're working on. So I want to make sure it's at, almost the lowest level that he can possibly feeling that stem at. But now, again, I'm going to kind of use this not as a correction, but just to put a little bit more added pressure, almost kind of annoyance type of feeling. So when I ask him for that specific command, I'm going to apply that pressure. And then as soon as he completes that command, I release that pressure. Just so with enough repetitions of that, he understands completing the command is what gets away of that annoying feeling. Good boy. All right, Wyatt, yes, sit. Sit. So I'm gonna help him, it's gonna be tricky, a little bit by adding light pressure on his butt, just so again, he's connecting the dots with the pressure and what command I am asking him for. So Wyatt, sit. Yes, good boy. So again, as soon as I say that sit command, I apply that pressure. And again, that repetition right there, definitely not how I want to do it. I want him going into that sit on his own, but I don't want to turn up the levels. I want to keep them nice and low. So just to help him connect the dots with what we're working on, when the command is said, he feels that pressure, and then once his butt hits the ground, I'm going to release that pressure. So if I have to help him out with a little extra guided pressure using my hand on his back end to push his butt down,
Hopefully he'll connect the dots with doing enough successful repetitions like that. Yes. Wyatt, sit. Yes, good. Ooh. So yeah, that was definitely a very uncomfortable and sketchy, training session that I just completed with Wyatt. Having come in, I could tell he was a dog that was going to redirect off of energy, corrections, this and that. I saw it a little bit, out on the training floor, kind of just doing some line work with him. But then coming in here, doing this training session, like I said, just simply doing some basic heel line work, trying to get him into that sit and down position, was something that we were struggling with, obviously on both sides of things, me as his trainer, Wyatt as the dog that I'm training. And then again, he just built up so much frustration that I don't think he understood what to do with that amount of energy going on in his head. And just through the corrections, whether it was a leash correction, me putting pressure on his butt, the e-collar pressure, he was just fighting through it, being very uncomfortable. And again, just with all of that, was kind of redirecting onto me. And again, it was just a little bit sketchy for me to, work through this. It's obviously something that I need to do. I can't just give up on him, send the dog home, not knowing the commands that I need to teach him to give the owners this amount of control. So definitely going to keep pushing forward. But again, just through all of that, again, I had to keep in mind keeping myself safe. So it was a little bit, uncomfortable at first, kind of dealing with that. But like I said, it's something that I need to continue on doing for obviously Wyatt, but more importantly, the owners going forward.
Learning for two, your dog and you, PartnersDogs.com.